Good evening.
Hello, all.
Hello.
Welcome to Monday
Memorial
night.
Day.
Monday night generational change. I'm Jen.
I'm Peter.
And so we do have a special Memorial Day. And I'm going to start it off with an anecdote from something that was really funny. So I'm in the process of planning this panel discussion for Julian.
This hasn't been changed.
No, it hasn't.
We got to change.
All right. So I'll get that, and I'll just not say what I.
And I have to say that Jen definitely is ready for Weed for Warriors.
Yeah, but I would like to say what I was trying to say.
Yes, I'm sorry.
No, you're not, because now I'm sitting here doing this.
Well, it's appropriate.
Okay, we're not really on top of things. So, if I may, okay. So, I'm planning this thing for Julian Assange, a panel discussion next week.
Yes.
And a very interesting thing. So, I send out an email to one of our panelists. I'm not going to name names, but this gentleman is a socialist. And I asked him what his availability was to meet today. Mm-hmm. And I just said, "What's your availability today?" And the response was really funny. So, for anybody who wants to know what happens when you email a socialist and ask them for their availability, I'm going to tell you what the answer is. And this was so amusing to me, I can't even. So this gentleman says, "Since I don't celebrate militarism and mass slaughter on Memorial Day, I should be available whenever is good for you and other people." So and even though that's kind of ridiculous, the way that it was in a response to just availability, it is kind of how I think about Memorial Day too. So normally I'm not very pro go red, white, and blue. I also find it very ironic that we care so much about memorializing dead people, but we don't take care of our live people. And we don't even specifically take care of our veterans, which is why we're having our first guest on Memorial Day. I think it's really important. If we're wanting to care and memorialize people that have died, maybe we should also take care of the people that lived. So we're going to have Kiernan on. He's with Weed for Warriors. And then the other thing we're going to be talking about on Memorial Day is something that, unfortunately, I was never taught in school, and actually is something I didn't really know of until like the past few years. And that's really, it's pathetic, and it's not something that I'm proud of. And I actually have a lot of anger about lack of history, but I digress.
Well, that's whitewashing of history that we have.
Correct. So today is the 100-year anniversary of the Tulsa Massacre, which is the largest race massacre that occurred in this country.
Yes.
And yet we're not taught about it in history. So we're going to talk about it here. We have Margaret Kimberley coming on.
Friend of the show.
She is amazing. And we're going to talk about that because I obviously now, since finding out about it, have done an inordinate amount of research because I tend to go down rabbit holes. But yes, we were not taught this in school. And so if we're going to be memorializing anything on Memorial Day, that's what we're going to be talking about. So
yeah, anything that's more in line with what really needs to be discussed. That's a very important part of this process. You know, a lot of people want to wave the flag today and say how much they appreciate their veterans, but no one wants to actually talk about concrete solutions. As we put out on social media earlier, you know, you've got 40,000 homeless veterans every day in this country. Universal basic income would definitely help with that. You have 600,000 veterans that don't have a job. Federal jobs guarantee would help with that. You have just under 2 million veterans that have some form of either PTSD or a mental health need. Medicare for All would help with that. So you can have your token moment today. And I'm not saying that it's disingenuous. I do believe a lot of people really do care about the veterans. I do think a lot of people
Well, today's Memorial Day, not Veterans Day. So that is true. You know, so it is a little bit different. So, I mean, I
think that they are somewhat interchangeable, though.
Well, they are, but it's very ironic to me how we are so willing to hang up flags and everybody acts all nationalistic and patriotic, but yet we don't worry about our veterans once they come back. So this is something that's a big issue for me. I feel like the best way that we can respect our service people is to stop sending them into wars for profit. That would be the number one way we could show our respect to people who want to serve their country, is to appreciate them and respect them and not do that. So as soon as we stop doing that, then maybe I'll start to think that we actually care about.
Just tone it down a little bit, Jen.
I'm sorry, Declan. I'm getting violent for you.
Yeah, you don't want to be doing that. A little too off the bat, really just like going right into it, making people feel uncomfortable. And not making it so that people are in a safe. You're not letting people live in a safe space.
I'm not worried about people's safety.
Well, no.
So do you want to like?
I think we should go right into Bootlicker of the Week, just because this is something that is.
It's really first of all, it's special. Mind. Let me preface this because we normally do not do a Bootlicker on Mondays.
We always do it on.
We always do Bootlicker on Thursdays, but this week, people, not that this is surprising, we have two people that are worthy enough of this honor, so we have to have a Bootlicker today. And this is also something that couldn't wait. So before we put this person up, let me preface this with we have so few actual journalists that are really out there investigating stories and giving us actual on the ground information. Very few. Okay. So when somebody who is not one of those people takes it upon herself to unfoundedly smear one of the few journalists that we actually have in this country, that's necessitating a Bootlicker.
And it's also jealousy. A lot of people, well, we've talked about this at length. There's a lot of people, whether in progressive circles, they really do not like the idea of sharing the spotlight. Like it's something that really irks people. But the Young Turks is a completely different animal in many respects because, what we're dealing with here is in many ways just the overarching problem. They used to be the dominant force in independent media.
Well, they suck butt now. And Princess Anna, and yes, I gave her a nice little tiara for her little princess self. Mm-hmm. Princess Anna decided to shoot the bird and yell expletives towards Aaron Mate, calling him out as what they call him a Russian asset. They said that he was denying or he was supporting. What they basically were calling him an Assad supporter because he dared to question the narrative about Assad poisoning his own people in Syria, which turned out to be a very valid question because it was not true. And this woman, this princess, has the audacity to smear him. Let me be clear that Aaron Mate is one of the best journalists that we actually have in this country right now.
He is.
Him and Max and Ben and Anya and the people at the Gray Zone are the real deal. So if she's going to come out smearing him, she's going to need a little evidence of that. But yet she's got none because she really isn't a journalist. So that's why I referred to her as fake journalist and raging. Yes. C*NT.
Yeah, I can't touch that. But
okay, fine. And let me tell you, this woman qualifies for that. And what a sellout. Just a total, complete sellout.
She's an exceptionally vitriolic individual. I've been following her for quite some time. This is one of many instances. She is definitely somebody who likes to stir the pot for the wrong reasons. She has a massive ego. And this is, just from my brief experiences with people at TYT, I happen to be good friends with somebody who used to work there, doesn't have a lot of flattering things to say about them, and especially doesn't have a lot of flattering things to say about her.
Interestingly, I just realized that we are always I am usually extremely adamant about criticizing or talking about other content creators. This is the very first time ever since we've started this show that I have had another content creator as a Bootlicker.
This is such a blatant attempt basically
screw you, Anna Kasparian, wanting to get rid of one of our real journalists. That's what I want. This is what you look like.
Well, yeah, it's
ridiculous.
Well, again, the biggest reason why Anna was doing this is because, let's face it, there's also you want to talk about Jimmy Dore, that he
not really. I never really want to talk about
Jimmy and Aaron and a lot of other them. Jimmy was really one who started this whole notion of I'm going to take down the Young Turks. Wow. And once that started happening, now everybody's really getting on board with it. And as it was pointed out the other day, I did watch the interview with Jimmy and Aaron. And the one thing that they did point out is that when TYT was at their peak, they were getting 30,000 live stream viewers. They were competing with the likes of the Stephen Crowders and the Tim Pools of the world. And that's serious business. Now they get 3,000. So basically, their entire operation has collapsed. There is no question that this has affected their bottom line.
Well, they're sellouts.
Well, of course. And look, the moment they took the $20 million,
and that would be Jeffrey Katzenberg. That would be his boot that Anna seems to be licking.
Yes. Once you take that money, it's over. It's over. And this is something that I've pointed out.
Then you become a corporate whore.
Well, I've pointed out in many instances when you have these organizations that are well-meaning and you back Democratic candidates, and there's nothing wrong with that. You have to, we have a two-party system, and right now the most viable path forward is in primaries through those systems. That's just, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be fighting an inside-outside strategy.
No, of course.
That is what is on the table, and you have to work with what you have. But with that said, the second that your organization becomes an extension of one of the two major parties, it's over. You will no longer be able to make decisions based on what's in the best interest of the people who are supporting your organization.
But quite honestly, this is above and beyond that, because they might have corporate control of their content and they have that, but her demeanor, her actions, her speech toward Aaron Mate is disgusting.
It is.
So that's on her. That has nothing to do with what she is or is not allowed to say. She could have just said nothing about it. And she'd still be a sellout, but she wouldn't be a raging. So now she's both.
And again,
give me a call, Anna. Let's chat.
They're going to such lengths to, and again, I don't know what their end game is. That's what I don't understand.
I just think they don't care.
At this point, they're just going for broke because people are more and more just getting turned off by their BS.
Yeah, well,
I don't think anybody actually really enjoys them anymore. And Max Blumenthal pointed it out the other day that they might as well just call themselves MSNBC, because that's really what it is now. They're just MSNBC on on YouTube. It really
they're terrible. They're terrible. So we're done with that. All right. So now what? We did our we haven't done a Monday bootlicker. So that's
I want to discuss a couple more things real quick about Anna. That's very important.
Oh, we're back on Anna?
We're not back on Anna. We never left. You don't get to this is not your show. This is our show.
But it's my name, Jen. It's not Peterational.
You want me to stop? Could you want to write anything on the chalkboard?
No, I can't fit two names. I can barely fit one person's full name.
Okay, so Happy Memorial Day, or just Memorial Day. I don't know why people say Happy Memorial Day.
I think I'm going to just leave it for right now. We're going to have it be blank. We're going to have it be dark in honor of a somber memorial.
Well, that's really what it's supposed to be. I don't know why they say Happy Memorial Day. That's kind of
and everybody turns it into a fun party weekend, so it's whatever.
Well, Kamala Harris.
All right, so if yes, you want to continue going
on.
But
the point that I think is very important here is, if you know Anna's history, this is just something that's been brewing for a long time. She is an exceptionally vitriolic person. She attacks people relentlessly. And the fact that she gave a literal tongue bath to Madeleine Albright is something that's still, again,
yeah, that's gross.
If that's really the one thing that I look at and just say, she gets an interview with her and doesn't challenge her in any capacity. If I feel like we have a guest on our show and I think that we don't go hard enough, I feel terrible about it. Even if it's somebody that we like, I always want to feel like I'm giving our audience the benefit of the doubt that we're always going to do right, even if it's somebody that we agree with.
Well, yeah.
That's
but how would you do that with Madeleine Albright? How would one do that with her?
Do you still believe that you made the right call?
She already has said that she did, though, and she'd already been asked that after the fact. That's the other thing. She'd already been asked in an interview after the fact if she thought it was worth the death of all those children, and she flat out said yes. So I really don't see what more there is to discuss about that with her, which is why the idea of anybody even just sitting down for an interview with her is just a sign of a sellout in and of itself.
The other thing that I will mention, and look, I give anybody who platforms Jen all the credit, because it matters, and paying it forward is very important. Cenk platformed Jen. They had a very nice conversation together. John Idarola platformed Jen. They had a very nice conversation together. Anna Kasparian could never be bothered to even acknowledge that Jen was alive.
But why? I don't care. Same network. The
point is, that you know what, you have that attitude, but I see things a lot differently.
I know
than you do. Because again, I know where people's heads are at. I know what they're thinking.
I know.
And she does not think her ish stinks. That's just the way it is. And so now, because things are starting to spiral, if you will, she's lashing out in a very aggressive way. And the quote that I thought the other day that was the best way to describe it was Caitlin Johnstone saying, Anna Kasparian's screams are the sounds of a crumbling empire.
Good.
And it's true. That is what it is. Because they're not going to come back from this. This is actually something that if you have Roger Waters telling you both to go to hell, that's a very bad look.
Yeah, it's not a good look.
I mean, somebody who doesn't even really get involved in politics.
Oh, I wouldn't say he doesn't get involved in politics.
Not to that degree. Not like that. Not where he's basically,
calling out content creators.
Yeah, that's definitely not his thing.
All right. Now can we move on from Anna Kasparian? Or are we still on that?
Yes, I think that's a great way to end it. And so, look, TYT had their day, and now the wealth has been spread around. It's just a question of when it ultimately just either admits that it's a corporate network or it just collapses altogether.
Okay.
So with that said, it is Florida. We obviously want to touch upon
we're not going to have
focus on
time
Florida.
to really go through that, are we? Not really.
I think
Before
we
our
have-
first guest.
Oh, we have. Oh no, is it 8:15? Yeah, I think Sean is actually supposed to be coming
Right.
in a minute.
So what I'm going
we'll
to
see
do
when
is
he's
I'm
gonna
going to
come on.
talk about very quickly of like an endorsement that I'm putting out. Not
Sure.
that I have any credence to give an endorsement, but it's just I felt like we were spending time talking nasty about someone, so I want to kind of bring it back to something positive.
Sure.
So because I put up this thing about Anna Kasparian, and we normally don't do a Monday Bootlicker. We don't normally do this either, but I want to put this out there because not that anybody here does not know, but we obviously endorse Nina Turner. Very much. Cannot stress that enough. And so this is to sort of counterbalance. I need to just look at Nina and like sort of just get a different vibe coming off of that last segment that we just did. So like this is better. Jenk loves union busting. Is that true? I mean, was he really
Unfortunately, there's a lot of things. Listen, let's not dive into that.
Yeah, all right. But anyway, so we are waiting for our first guest to come on, right?
Yes.
Okay. And we're going to be talking with him about, the organization Weed for Warriors, obviously it's, to get marijuana for vets. Obviously a lot of them, there's pain issues, there's PTSD issues. There's a lot of things wherein marijuana is very therapeutic. And unfortunately, they have to fight for every little thing. So that's how we treat our veterans. And we're going to get some more information on that. But yeah, so I wanted to counter the negative of Anna with the happy Nina. So here's happy Nina.
One of the, we talk about the importance of having Medicare for all and what that would mean for so many veterans, because remember, the most common form of death for a veteran is suicide. So when we talk about the significance of Memorial Day, we're talking about the serious issues that are related to mental health and what we are and are not doing in that regard. Now, obviously, Medicare for all is the ultimate, but the most immediate, I would say, positive thing that we could do on behalf of veterans is to fully decriminalize cannabis.
Yes.
And
there's a lot of things to do for veterans. I've never really understood or like the fact that they have this sort of like government runs, their system, the VA system is really substandard.
Right.
It's really substandard. And so to me, when I think of things like Medicare for all, then yeah, veterans would just get healthcare because we would all just have healthcare. They would get mental health. They would have that because we would just get that. They would have dental because we would just have that. It's like on the one hand, we're saying we care enough about our veterans to give them healthcare that we don't give to other people. But let me tell you, people, if you've not been to a VA, with few exceptions, they're absolutely horrid. They're horrid. This is no way that we should be treating our veterans. So while they do have a healthcare system, and oftentimes people will use the VA system to basically slander the concept of universal healthcare, saying, look how bad that is because it's government run healthcare. And yeah, it is. It is kind of bad. So, that's something that we need to address. And if we do have a Medicare for all system, what does that mean for our veterans? What happens to the VA? I am curious how that would work with the veterans when we do get a single payer system.
I am also wondering how hard they're going to get pushback, as you can imagine, from the MIC, because the goal here, of course, is we do not have a draft, and we're never going to have one again. That would literally be millions of people in the streets. So they're having a very hard time convincing people to join, the armed services. So it's
they've been putting out some real alluring ads lately.
And listen, if you're getting to the point where you think
oh
that
my God.
the way you recruit somebody into the CIA is to tell them that we are as woke as you could possibly
when the
be.
CIA is advertising their wokeness to try to recruit people, you've reached a very strange place.
There is again, you can rationalize time and again all the issues that exist and why these things are happening the way that they're happening. But I just think more and more people are becoming hip to the game. They're becoming well aware of how this is being done and why it's being done. I'm not, I mean, I'm not suggesting that we're not going to be able to get there, but there's been a lot of this. I noticed this argument that's been going online about the idea about pushing for statewide universal health care.
Yep.
And a lot of the MMT people are pushing back against it, saying that, you have to tax and spend at the state level versus the federal where you can print money. And while being a currency issuer at the macro level is different than being a currency user at a micro level, yes, it's different. But how long do you think it's going to take, or how can people wait for healthcare at this point?
Yeah.
You can't wait. So you have to take drastic measures. And at some point, you have to push whatever way you can push. And I think the best argument for that, even though it's not a perfect solution based on the fact that there was supplemental assistance from the federal government in Canada. But remember, universal healthcare was passed in Canada because they passed it in the province of Saskatchewan first. And then they were able to push it across the entire country.
Yeah, actually, you probably won't watch that thing I sent you, but there was a PBS. You won't, because it was really good. But about a month ago, there was something I found it on YouTube. It's a PBS movie, and it's called Critical Care, and it's a comparison of the American healthcare system, and they compare it to Australia, France, and I want to say we do look at Canada, and it was really interesting. And I really liked it. I thought it was done really well. So it was called Critical Care. It's on YouTube. It was a PBS documentary. I mean, it wasn't really, it was really good. We are going to be doing Medicare live stream panel-a-thon, similar to the one we did for Julian Assange.
2 days before the actual march nationwide, which is July 24th. So we're going to be doing it on Thursday, July 22nd. That obviously will be our main live stream night, but we are going to have it be... It'll
be longer.
And it's going to have panels.
It'll have panels.
And what we're thinking, and of course we welcome your feedback, but what we're thinking is you have to have a very specific ask. Like you can call your representative and say, we want Medicare for all.
When you're not raising money, what is it you're doing? So what are you wanting people to do?
We think that the state that has the best chance to get this over the finish line is New York. The New York Health Act, as we had mentioned the other day, was endorsed by Andrew Yang. That is a big deal, considering he has definitely a libertarian right faction within his coalition, and being able to endorse that type of an issue is very significant. Now, look, do I think it gets roadblocked by Cuomo? Yeah, very likely. But let's get to that point. It's
still the closest state that there is of they're the closest of any of the states out there that have this kind of
that has real momentum right now. And you know what? Let it be the Empire State.
So our ask will be for New York. So basically we're going to be doing our live stream telethon for New York. And our ask is going to be for people to be contacting New York state senators and representatives. We'll provide lists of people, have links, and the ask will be for everybody to contact those people in the state of New York and demand that New York passes Medicare for all. Now, obviously, people that aren't from New York are not going to have the same kind of standing as people in New York. But I think that when you start lighting up people's phones, especially at a state level, it's noticeable.
Yes, I definitely agree. And I do think, again, this is if we only needed to knock down one or two dominoes, depending on who was holding this up, if this was Washington State, the only problem with Washington State right now and whole Washington is they don't have enough momentum behind them at the moment at the state legislature level.
But you think New York does?
I think New York absolutely does. And so that's where you gotta move in on that, because there's so many, again, I keep trying to tell people, yes, we are definitely frustrated with a lot of the moves that AOC has made since she's been in Congress. Or has not made. But you cannot deny the movement that her win has started in New York City. It's just, we would never be this close to something like this if she didn't win. Could you imagine Joe Crowley, what he would be doing? And never forget how close Joe Crowley was with Governor Cuomo. So there's no question that this has been a game changer. And now the question is, can we get through to the finish line? And look, we're obviously very upset about what ultimately happened with Dianne Morales, but the fact that Andrew Yang was willing to endorse the New York Health Act speaks volumes to where we've gotten to this point over the last several years. There are so many things that we look forward to accomplishing, but as you know, it is Memorial Day, and this is a very significant issue that needs to be talked about. As we will be talking about with Sean Kiernan, who is the CEO of the Weed for Warriors Project, an amazing organization. You should definitely follow on Instagram.
I mean, granted, I'm a supporter of the Weed for Everyone project.
No, it's all good.
Yeah. I'm just saying, you want to just specify.
Jen has one
warriors.
of her people coming on right now.
I'm just saying.
Which I think this is the first time you'll be communicating live.
Yeah, I don't think we've met.
No, not formally. We've had conversations on the phone, but this is obviously a lot more of an interesting thing because, again, he really is, just an amazing guy who's done amazing work for his fellow veterans. Suicide is the #1 cause of veteran deaths. So, this is, again, cannot stress the importance of this particular issue.
The truth
right
is
now.
that veterans really are a vulnerable group. It's not treated as a vulnerable group in a way that I think it needs to be treated as a vulnerable group.
Let's have less flag waving and a lot more policy making.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. And that
and
rhymes.
Weed
and I
for
thought
everyone.
of that right off the top of my head. Didn't even have to think twice. Without further ado, the CEO of the Weed for Warriors Project.
I think you say president, right?
I'm just another grunt. That's, I think, what we say. I happen to be the guy who I think understands accounting and stuff like that. So I got ushered into this position. But we tend to have a very flat organization, I would say.
Sean, it really is a pleasure to have you. And first and foremost, thank you for all that you do. Obviously, this is, for veterans, this is obviously a very tough day. And, people want to, try to acknowledge veterans in whatever way they think is, possible. I mean, certainly there's a lot of pandering that goes on, but I do think it's important on days like today to point out what can be done to improve the lives of our veterans so that things like suicide become a lot less prevalent and we don't have to be worrying about those that we lose. And of course, obviously having an anti-war message helps as well. So if you could first just introduce yourself, talk about your organization and what you guys do and how you are helping fellow veterans.
Right. So I help run the Weed for Warriors project. It was founded in San Jose by Kevin Richardson, a Marine who just come off a suicide attempt himself. Found the benefits of cannabis and wanted to sing from the mountaintops its success in dealing with that. And at that point in time, I was working with Dr. Sue Sisley and another vet, Ricardo, on Vets for Dr. Sue Sisley, helping raise awareness of her plight, researching cannabis's effect on PTSD, whole plant cannabis. When we got that funded by the state of Colorado, in 2014, fall of 2000, winter 2014, I met Kevin Richardson at the High Times Cup in Denver, and my future partner and his future partner, the three of us have been running it since. Kevin is more the artsy, creative person. Mark Carrillo is our COO, which basically means he's a Marine and he does the work. I think they call me the president CEO because I get to talk a lot, which the other two don't like to do. So what we did originally was Kevin started a chapter in San Jose, and under the old cannabis rules in California, you needed patients to grow for, and we were a patient base. So we blew up from south to north across the country as disabled veterans, helping disabled veterans access cannabis. And over time, that's changed a bit, primarily because as we've gone to this new tax and regulate model, of high taxes and limited supply, but decriminalizing it effectively, then I think, we are trying to figure out how to create that access. And when you talk about the suicide and overdose epidemic, there's no magic bullet, right? Or magic, solution, but we do have tools, and there are tools we're underinvested in. And obviously being Weed for Warriors, I'm going to tell you first and foremost, in January, UC Davis and Yale published a study in the British Journal of Medicine, I believe it was, showing in California where legal access exists with dispensaries, those opiate overdose deaths were lower. And that mirrors and mimics other studies we've had showing suicides being lower, domestic violence being lower. And these are all common sense reasons when people who understand cannabis and the other illicit drugs that we're talking about here, cannabis doesn't not only not kill, it basically mellows people out. Police used to say we never broke up fights at cannabis events, right?
Right.
and so, when we hear, our university saying that, hey, we're seeing lower suicides and overdoses and other bad episodes in our community where cannabis is available as a substitute to, not only opiates, but the pharmaceutical approach that carries with us FDA, side effects of overdose, death, and suicidal ideation with the antidepressants. And so, it's not a surprise to us. It's what we live every day. It's what we see. And so if you ask me what's something we can do for vets, is let them have the freedom to choose cannabis as a substitute. The deadly opiates were not only being prescribed, then being addicted to, and then you find in my list of market heroin and opiates, and the antidepressants and antipsychotics and everything else that, does create, by the FDA's own admittance, suicidal ideation. So it should be no shock where it's highly correlated. They'll always say, well, it's not causative. Well, of course, because studying whole plant cannabis is next to impossible. So, I think from our perspective, it's that. And then it really is about investing in mental health. I mean, if you want to know what I think it is, it's poverty. And when we talk about the enlisted veterans, which make up 95% of our veterans, you're talking about a group that comes from poor Black, brown, and white communities throughout this country, working class communities. And I was born in 1972, so I do remember a lot of this, but we started cutting the social safety net back in the early 80s. And we, shut down mental hospitals. We underinvested in these our communities, and we basically cut resources. And so when you take these veterans from these communities and then dump them back into these communities, it should be no wonder that they're suffering at a higher rate, much like their brothers and sisters who are non-veterans who come from these poor areas are suffering of a higher rate. So there's very much a class issue in here. And that's the unfortunate thing that I see, having been on both sides as a grunt RTO in the jungles of Panama to working in a hedge fund on Park Avenue. You've seen both sides of the extreme, and it's bad. And it's worse than I think most people realize, because you don't have a perspective how bad it is, most Americans. And I think that's something that's shocking to me, how in this country we let that continue.
Yeah, I think in general. Oh, something's
echo on your end, Sean.
You got to turn it down a little.
I'll turn it down. Is that better?
Yeah, that's better. Okay. So the thing I notice is that now that we're starting to see legalization, either medicinal legalization, recreational legalization, whichever it is, that is not, as you were indicating and you alluded to, the entire problem, because they still don't have access to it. It's because it's not something that is sort of given as a treatment option. It's not a preferred treatment option like your opioids that will be given to you at, low, copay cost or whatever it is. In order for people to get cannabis, it's like ridiculous. So even if you're allowed to have it, that doesn't mean that you can get it. And I think that's a huge problem. And especially when you're talking about the idea of like the class consciousness and understanding the poverty level of a lot of people. First of all, a lot of people that go into the military, they were poor to begin with, and that's why they went in there. That's unfortunately our jobs program in this country. And so, a lot of the people are already coming out of poverty. People that have means and education and lots of opportunities, it's not always, generally don't go into enlisted service. That's just not the norm. So these are already poor people, right? So then they come out with additional issues, still have no resources. And at a minimum, they should be given weed. Is that,
Yeah, right. In an ideal world, you would be like other countries that see that not only the therapeutic, but the best policy here, which is the best policy is to provide it as a tool. And why? Because if you're not providing it as a tool, they're probably doing it anyways. They're not supervised, or they're using some other illicit substance that's way more harmful for themselves, therefore their families, therefore the community. And so it just makes no sense. It's kind of like, it's that moral high ground we have that in so much of America, which is like, I always liken this whole discussion to, sex education and the people who believe we should only teach abstinence. Right. And I appreciate moral high ground, and for your kids are great, but we want actual policy that works, and we know it works, right? Access to birth control and honest education. And so when we're talking about this, the sad part about it is they're not doing anything. It's like there's an argument out here in California, which is going to mirror which Florida's model is, which is we're creating these oligopolies. And like you said, you're going from prohibition to cost prohibition. And in many places, geographic prohibition, because in California, 80% of the state, now you can't sell legal access. And that's because we have this thing called local control. And, you know, that works out great. But this is the real problem is, like I said, you have no control, because when you shut down legal cannabis, all you're doing is stoking the illicit market. So you're bringing in the criminality legality was supposed to eliminate. You're denying patients medicine, and it was patients that got everyone to, you know, this thing legalized. And what we've seen is corporate cannabis cozy up with prohibitionist interests to keep that small oligopoly that keeps legal cannabis out of reach as a treatment tool for not only most veterans, most enlisted veterans, but most people in general. And you only have to look at California, the land of weed, and show that 80%, and this is multiple recent, you know, sources, 80% of the cannabis market in California is the illicit market. And so the unfortunate thing with the way we're legalizing cannabis is we're not accomplishing anything but creating an oligopoly to pay off the government and pay off the 1%. And we're still now, the most ironic thing about this whole thing is now industry is urging localities and states to crack down on the illicit market, keeping the bullseye in the back of the poor and working class that was there before. And no one really says anything in this country because it's the moneyed interest, right? And so the paid for media doesn't, we know whose advertising dollars they're putting in place. But the sad part is that's the thing. It's not even a real policy, because the policy is so dysfunctional that on itself, it should call it into question and eliminate it, right? It's like I said, prohibition hasn't worked for 60 years. Well, what makes you think we're now going to be able to force the illicit market in by offering overpriced weed and keeping the crackdown going on the poor and middle class? So it's actually real immoral, disturbing, dysfunctional news. And the worst part about it is, and I hate to stereotype, but so many of our cannabis advocates come from very privileged communities. I mean, right? People who can smoke pot openly advocate for it, and you know, they're 50 years and older white people, and you see these national organizations, and their perspective is such that they're one of the big organizations in California. We were fighting against in California local control. There was a debate whether deliveries could deliver medicine, cannabis, to a private home in a locale that didn't want them to. And so you literally have a delivery van on a public road go to, let's say, a veteran's house, and these local cities wanted to ban that. They wanted to say you couldn't do that legally. It's setting cannabis access back tremendously for people who are homebound, right? And the amazing thing about it is the state head of this national organization made a deal that said, you know, we'll allow it, and we'll allow these huge funds to crack down on the illicit market. So you literally had a patient's right advocate group giving huge grants to the police and cities to now crack down on illicit cannabis, which, by the way, is the only market patients and poor and working class people use. And it's not our numbers, it's the own state's numbers, it's the own industry's numbers and something. So we're dealing with what we deal with in America, governed by the few for the fewer, and the majority pay for it. And until we wake up as a society, they're going to continue to do it.
Sean, you bring up a really great point, and this is obviously leads to the biggest issue when it comes to decriminalization, even legalization of cannabis, and that, of course, is home grow. It is definitely the silver bullet in many ways, because big industry doesn't want any part of it, and that is what they are trying to prevent. They do not want people, and again, this is one of the signature issues that progressives and libertarians share. They do not want the government having anything to do with this. If you want to be able to have cannabis, you should be able to go to whatever shop that wants to sell it, buy it there, or if you want to grow it at your own home, you do it there. And there should be no monopolization. This was something that I know was very big in Ohio when they were trying to legalize it there, I want to say like 6-7 years ago, and they were basically giving like 7 to 10 companies the right to sell it. So this,
that's how it is everywhere. That's what they're trying to do here. That's what we have here. It's just like, that's what we're talking about. It's an oligopoly on weed.
Yeah, and that of course is the big issue. So if you could talk about your organization and how I would assume that fighting for home grow to be in any type of, whether it's, you know, statewide legislation, federal legislation, is something that's very important to you guys.
Right. I mean, it's with the MORE Act, which I applaud all the cause, what it was trying to accomplish. Again, I just think we need workable models. And so the home grow aspect is really the last resort, right? And it should be a no-brainer because at the end of the day, but the problem exists is we have a very restrictive supply. And like you said, there's now financial incentives to restrict that supply. And so to the investor, they don't want any erosion of their market share, and forcing people to buy in their dispensaries makes sense. Remember, that a big part of this, though, is this whole tax and regulate model that was pushed on us. What was also pushed by the American Medical Association and these organizations that felt high taxes would be restrictive. And there's an old saying, when your doctors start talking about stocks, get out of the stock market. Well, when your doctors start talking about taxes, maybe we should rethink. They may know something really well, but they don't know something else. And there's a Stanford psychiatrist I won't name, there's no need to do it, who's a big champion of this. And he thinks they can control this and that you can't control any of this. So the problem with all these things, and home grow is so important because you're not stopping it. It's happening anyways. All you're doing is criminalizing whole sects of people. All you're doing is creating police encounters, right? That unfortunately for a big swath of enlisted veterans who don't happen to look like me or you, that's a real dangerous situation, right? Yes. And at the end of the day, home grow is essential for people if you want to keep this oligopoly model. But the key point is none of this stuff they're proposing is good public policy by the numbers, by the evidence. And so what's going on is they're buying votes, and our politicians who bear hug veterans, Democrat and Republican, to be honest, I'm very disappointed with the neoliberal portion of the Democratic Party, and they hug us, and yet they push and vote for policy that is flattened just against our interest and say they do it in our interest. And yes, home grow is essential because it's the only way people can afford it, but it's how home grow is done. For example, in California, they said they gave us home grow, but it's 6 plants per house. And by the way, if you rent your house, the landlord can tell you you can't grow. And every landlord, because their insurance policy is going to say that, right? Right. And apartments, now you can't even smoke in 90% of them in California, your own apartment, because of the nanny state. And you're sitting there going, this is absurd, the control people think they have, because you're not controlling it. All you're doing is creating a whole swath of people who now are disenfranchised and viewed as people not behaving like our government wants them to behave. And that just, cascades into other problems. So yeah, home grow is important, but what's more important is we just recognize the reality of what's going on here. And you basically decriminalize possession in these states because now people can use it. And you think you're going to control supply and charge 3 to 4 times the real market rate and think you're not going to have an illicit market. This is basic economics.
Yeah.
What would be your message for anybody who wants to get involved with your organization? What is your ultimate goal right now in terms of
what are your projects? Like what are your projects that you're working on?
So one of the big successes we've had in California is SB 34. And what SB 34 does is open within the track or trace model a donation. So it allows the brands to donate cannabis to veterans or any patient who has a medical recommendation. And so we've done events you can see on social media where we're getting bags of cannabis to veterans at once, twice a month, and up and down the state. We just had one in this weekend. We had West Hollywood. We had Lompoc, which is in Santa Barbara County. We had Modesto on Saturday, and we're doing San Jose tomorrow. And 50 to 100 vets get bags that can up to $1,000. What this allows them to do is therefore take their limited disposable income and buy more meds for the rest of the month. So they literally can now medicate on cannabis over anywhere from 8 to 30 pills they'd be taking a day at the VA. That's a model we want to expand to states like Florida and expand to states like Nevada and Massachusetts where the pricing's an issue. So that's a big success. The other thing we're doing is we're starting a talk of an initiative. We've invested in a drafted initiative to fix Prop 64, which is California's legal cannabis model. And we do that by loosening up regulation and the taxes and financial burden to allow industry to compete, because you do not have an illicit alcohol market in the state of California because it is accessible and affordable. And that's best public policy, to have it within the law. And so that's what we're really focused on, is access. And then we will continue once COVID lets up in the state of California. On the middle of this month, they'll open up. We'll start to do events again. In fact, we have one going on Friday where we bring veterans together and really get them to mingle, because it's not the cannabis that heals. It's the cannabis that allows these veterans to create the network and connections that they're dearly missing, that social network that they were used to because they had a band of brothers and sisters. And when you get thrown in our society, very disconnected, they lose their way. And so it brings people back together to help each other. And that's just the focus of what we do.
If there's anything that we can do, obviously, we definitely would like to connect with Brendan. We have spoke with before. That's obviously down here in the Miami area. One of the things that we did do prior to COVID really taking off was we were helping at the Veterans Hospital, and that's something that.
And then that, of course, got shut down.
Yeah.
But,
so anything that we can do going forward, obviously, we want to continue to build this relationship with you guys. We think what you're doing is absolutely fantastic.
See, I would be very hip to the idea of weed donation.
Weed donation is definitely.
I'm collecting. Yeah. Look, I am actually in the process of collecting hygiene packs and socks and stuff to be doing regular homeless disbursement. And I would love to live in a world where I could put a little bag or a blunt in each one of my little hygiene packs.
Sean, I can assure you that what we're doing with GenCorp, that if we do something with the veterans, it will go directly where it belongs.
Oh, yeah.
So if there's anything in particular that you think we could do, especially down here at the local level, and potentially expand that, sort of like set the model.
Keep us apprised.
Yes, please do. Like I said, we're happy to communicate with Brendan. We really appreciate what your organization is doing. You guys are absolutely phenomenal. And as I like to say, it's easy to wave the flag. It's even more impressive if you're willing to put some teeth into some of these primary issues that are of great concern to veterans. We need to have less, need to be remembering so many veterans on a day like today. We would like to prevent veteran death, and I think we can really help with that by
Weed for Warriors.
Weed for Warriors. What more could you say?
We need to get Jen elected over Debbie, because she's for hell not helping us.
No, she will never be your friend.
I think if there's one thing that we can say that is a distinction between Jen and Debbie Wasserman Schultz, is that Jen actually believes in civil liberties and Debbie does not, or her corporate donors do not, and she just obliges. So it's the same thing. But with that said, we were very grateful that you came on the program this evening.
Thank you so much, Sean.
Guys, remember, WFWproject.org. Please go check out Sean's organization.
Be a lover, be a supporter, be a weed smoker.
Well, please do. We insist. And then, I guess so. We do
be
insist.
A weed partaker.
Life is obviously a lot easier with cannabis.
Yes.
So what can you say?
Yes.
It is. And veterans, you want these veterans medicated in your community. They are happier, they are nicer, and they're better neighbors. Hi. And just leave them alone if you don't like it.
Yes. Thank you so much. Perfect ending.
Perfect ending.
Thank you, Sean.
My friend. Have a great
day.
Bye. See you, brother. And thanks for your service as always.
What, you got to remove.
Yes. I mean, what can you say? He's just a great guy. And if I remember correctly, he sought you out, and which was even more amazing. He just saw that you were running. And I'm sure a lot of it has to do with the fact that, like I said, the one thing that we have been privy to from Jen running for Congress, Debbie's reputation precedes her. And so because of that, it becomes a lot easier for people naturally to just want to see what other option may be on the table. But with that said, you were certainly somebody that was very palatable in this.
I was a much more palatable option on the way. Well,
so.
definitely.
And so for civil liberties nonetheless. But with that said,
all right, we're moving on to segment 2.
We do honor our veterans, but today is an even more significant day
that
never gets talked about, because it is the century anniversary of one of the darkest moments in our nation's history, which of course is the Tulsa Massacre.
Can I talk about the fact that it really does infuriate me that we're not taught this? Because again, there's a lot of hyperbole when it comes to our political dialogue, and when somebody says that we are whitewashing history. If you want to know what whitewashing history is, this is it. This is it. The largest race massacre in the history of the country, and we're not taught that in our school. I didn't even, and I'd like to think that I'm somewhat of a student of history, because I've always been fascinated by it. I didn't learn about this until I was long out of college. Well, same. So that, and that's unacceptable. So, coincidentally, this Memorial Day is the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Massacre, and we are going to talk about it. I'm going to pick one of my favorite people's brains. So, Margaret Kimberley, friend of the show, Margaret Kimberley, author, activist, and historian. And I've been listening to you on a very daily basis because I always listen to like a different chapter from the book. I'm up to Calvin Coolidge.
Oh, the libertarian himself.
Whatever. And so, I love hearing your voice. And now it's sort of this, like, it has set the benchmark for me with Audible, because it's really only good for me when it's the author that's doing it. I don't know what, like, especially if I know what they sound like. If I didn't know what you sounded like, then maybe I wouldn't know. But it's so cool that you did that. I appreciate it. And for anyone listening, I'm talking about Margaret's book, Prejudential. It's a really cool historical,
is that the full name? Yes, there it is.
Yep, Prejudential. And it's awesome. Every chapter is a different president, and it really talks about the presidents in from the perspective of the Black community and natives. Also, it talks a lot about Native community as well. So, Margaret,
That's
I don't
too
even.
big.
Yeah, that's really big.
I gotta shrink that down.
It's really big.
I wrote it too big.
I mean, obviously, this is something that I'm sure you've known about a good portion of your life, but why don't you didn't either?
No, I was an adult before, and I was a history major. I did not know about the Tulsa Massacre. I would say I was in my 30s. I'm going to say it's 25 years ago that I first knew that this took place.
Okay. And really, when I always feel like at some point in history, there was a person or persons who made a decision at one point to take things off of the table in terms of what we're willing to teach. And, you know, it's one of those things that clearly a group of people decided, and specifically, I know in Oklahoma, they like banned the whole discussion of it. Right. But this is not, of course, the only event that's happened to. Like it happens all the time. But could you give a little bit for people who don't know the background of the Tulsa Massacre, and maybe a little bit about the Greenwood neighborhood and what was happening there, and just so people know?
Sure. You know, it is a very common story, unfortunately, that Black people were subject to terrorist mob violence. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, in 1921, it all began, as these things often did, with a claim that a Black man had assaulted a white woman. A white mob formed, as always happens. What happened next was somewhat unusual. The Black community banded together to protect this young man and prevent him from being lynched. Very brave act. But the local authorities and local citizens banded together to attack the Black community of Greenwood. Over the period of 2 days, several hundred people were killed. It's not clear how many people were killed. Obviously, the people who committed the crime weren't going to count, but homes were destroyed, burned down. Basically, the Black community of Greenwood was destroyed, and the survivors were scattered to neighboring communities and out of the state of Oklahoma altogether. You just talked about how events like these are taken out of history. And this literally there were apparently newspaper stories, not just about the massacre, but that bombs were dropped on this community. The Oklahoma National Guard that was in its infancy, but they pulled it together enough to drop bombs on people. And apparently there were newspaper accounts of this, but these newspapers were destroyed, and the evidence disappeared. It lived only in memory. Now, so no, you're not alone in not being taught the history of this Tulsa Massacre or of the hundreds of other incidents like it. 2 years before, in 1919, it was called Red Summer. And there were attacks like this across the country against Black people in the North, in the South, in the Midwest. And those are just two. But there are many, many other incidents of Black people being driven out of their communities, mob attacks. And it is a good thing that this is now known, not just the events in Tulsa, but that it was not unusual, and it should not be treated as some unique event, because it was not.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because I have seen, since I learned about this and looked stuff up, there are photos. And there are photos from overhead, which of course substantiates the idea that there were airplanes and that were dropping bombs on this community. But the thing that I find so particularly insidious about all of it is that this seems to happen when Black communities are really rising up right now. So what people have to understand is that Greenwood was not just some ghetto somewhere.
No.
Okay. So this was, I mean, would you talk a little bit about what that was? Because I think that was really what was setting them off, was the success of that.
It was known as Black Wall Street.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yep.
yeah,
It was called Black Wall Street. Now it's an irony of history, an irony of segregation, that Black people were forced often to serve themselves. So that meant there would be Black stores, Black businesses. If a Black person managed to go to law school or med school, segregation meant that they could not operate in white communities. So at that time, and for many decades afterwards, Black communities were very diverse. There were poor people, there were people doing better, there were people doing very well. And it's not the only time that the fact that people were prospering became and a cause of incitement against them. There was jealousy against them. There was the desire to keep Black people in their place. And so it was not unusual for prosperous Black people to be attacked in this manner. Having said that, I don't want to emphasize that too much. I know people don't intend, and I know Black people especially, we want to talk about how we excel despite terrible odds, especially at that time in history. But, Black people of every economic strata were subject to terrorism and mob violence. And I also don't want people to think that it was worse because the community was prosperous. I'm not saying that's your intention or anyone else's. But,
no.
I think we need to stop and think about emphasizing that fact, although it did, I believe, and many others believe, play a role in the authorities targeting those people.
Yeah.
Could you talk about how many of the members of the white mob were apparently deputized? They were legally allowed.
This was quite frequent. They would be deputized like a posse, like in the Westerns. But ordinary people would be deputized, meaning they had the power of law enforcement, which meant they had impunity. Now, often in other cases, no one bothered with that because just being white was to give one impunity. But yes, people were deputized. The National Guard came in. In fact, 2 years earlier in Elaine, Arkansas, which was one of the events in Red Summer, members of the armed forces, the Army, came in after Black sharecroppers began to demand that they receive fair prices for their crops. It started as an interracial effort and then descended into mob violence. The same thing with hundreds of Black people being killed. But law enforcement were very often the people who led the mob, who incited the mob, who would deputize the mob. And even if they didn't do all of those things, they would protect the perpetrators.
Right. So I caught that you were watching a little bit when we were talking with Sean. But one of the things that we spoke about was the disproportionality of Black people and other vulnerable communities that enlist into the military. And it's interesting to me. And when I look back and see things historically about Black people that have served in the military, there were so many times throughout history, and it's still like this now, but you're talking about people fighting for a country that doesn't recognize their rights. Yeah. And I find that to be such this juxtaposition, especially on Memorial Day, when we're talking about service people. And I think about people that serve that are Black and the complete difference in treatment. And I just was wondering if you would talk a little bit about that. I don't know what your, knowledge base is on the history of Blacks in service, but I know that this has been an ongoing thing.
Yeah. I want to say one thing before I answer that question. Sure. I want to talk about the history of Memorial Day and the role that Black people played.
Please.
In 1865, shortly after the Civil War ended, there was an event that came to be known as Decoration Day. And newly emancipated people in Charleston, South Carolina, took it upon themselves to reinter Union soldiers who had been kept in a prison at a racetrack. And they were in a mass grave. And they took it upon themselves to reinter their bodies and to decorate their graves and to have a parade. And it was known as Decoration Day. So that's one of the first instances of people taking time to remember the war dead. So I wanted to add that first. But your point about the Black people in the military is well founded. This is, the military has been seen as a help to many Black people, and sometimes it has. But the military was segregated until 1948. In World War I, Black soldiers, it was funny. Young men had to sign up for the draft, and the draft card would have a little notch on the upper right corner that was torn off if the person was Black. I found my grandfather's draft cards from 1917 and 1918, and those Black companies that actually served under France. It was some sort of weird arrangement in order to keep from saying that Black men could serve. And World War II, the same thing, segregated units, obvious mistreatment of people who went to fight. And there were efforts to use military service as a means of improving the lot of the entire group. So it was called the Double V campaign, Double Victory campaign in World War II. Obviously, the fight against fascism, and it was hoped, be something that would propel Black people forward and out of the terrible oppression they suffered at the time. Now, there were, when I talk to people in my late parents' generation, they will say that military service and during the war helped a lot of men, but in some cases, for example, the GI Bill, Black veterans were kept from getting their benefits. These programs were administered by states, and that meant, and most Black people then as now lived in the South, and guess what happened? Or actually, it even happened in the North as well, where Black people were cheated out of their GI Bill benefits. So they didn't even get them. Now, the military was finally desegregated by Harry Truman in 1948. People like Eisenhower were opposed to it. In fact, the desegregation was phased in over a period of years. But all of the things that veterans suffer from, Black veterans suffer from more likely to be homeless, more likely to be unemployed. All of these things that you were discussing earlier on are more likely to happen to Black people. So, and as you also pointed out, it's harder to recruit. Ordinarily, when their economic times are tough, people are likely to join the service because they don't have other opportunities. But that is not happening now. People know too much. I don't know if you remember last year or a couple of years ago, the Army had a Twitter post about, tell us how your service, tell us about your service. Tell us about how you feel about having served. And to say they got ratioed was an understatement. People talking about unemployment, homelessness, sexual assault in the military. I mean, it went on and on. They didn't delete the tweets maybe they have by now, I don't know, a couple years ago. But people now know that they exaggerate how the military will benefit you. You'll get a free education. Well, if you're a full-time student, and who's going to be a full-time student after they've been in the service? All of the things that they lie to kids to get them, very young people, 17, 18 years old, to get them to sign up. And people know it now. So these holidays where we remember the war dead they're tricky. So you want to remember people who suffered, who died, but died for what? Now we have, the Civil War, which I mentioned, where there were Black units, the U.S. colored troops served and helped win the war. But then you had the mistreatment that I just spoke of. But then you have the service of people who helped win, let's say, World War II. Everybody seems to agree that defeating Hitler was a good thing, but what the other wars, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, can we really be proud of those of America's role in those conflicts and even World War II? There were corporations that did business with Hitler almost until December 7th, 1941. So
how about the rally at Madison Square Garden?
Rallies, pro-fascist rally, open support for fascism. But so we've got to be careful. On the one hand, remembering people who died, and after the draft, you talked briefly about the draft. The Vietnam War was the last one where there was a draft where people from many walks of life, different stratas of society might be in the military. Ending the draft meant that we have now this segmented society where there are entire groups of people who are never going to be in the military. It's a poverty draft now. Yeah. So we have young people who basically don't have any other opportunity joining the military, who end up dead in Iraq or Afghanistan. God only knows what other places they're planning.
Jen first.
Yeah, I want to just talk a little bit more about Tulsa and in terms of the after effects and what happened there, because that was such a thriving community and it was destroyed. I want to be clear. There were no reparations. Nobody was made whole. Nobody got another house. So you had an inordinate amount of homeless people. And people that died, but people that were still alive that now have no business, no home, no nothing. And what was the after effects in that area between then and now? Like, what has happened? Has it come back at all? Where did a lot of those people migrate to?
Well, people went everywhere. I suspect that most people would not have gone too far away. It probably would have been difficult for them. Probably went elsewhere in the state. There was an actual prison camp shortly after the violence ending and the destruction ended. So no one was ever compensated. And I think it's important to remember that too, and to see this not as a unique event. Tulsa is Black American history. It's a lack of compensation for slavery, for working without pay, for segregation, for all of the things that we've talked about. So people were not compensated when their homes were burned down in Tulsa, but people weren't compensated in other places with other mob attacks, urban renewal, segregation, redlining, all of these things that happen up until now. You may have seen these stories now about Black people's homes when they are being valued for far less than their worth. And there are people who get a white friend to sit in their house so that their home they don't lose the value of their property. So this is something that should not be seen as taking place in the distant past, but something that that happens to this day.
We're speaking with Margaret Kimberley, author of Prejudential. And of course, Jen informed me about what a bastard, unfortunately, my favorite president, Teddy Roosevelt, was.
I gave him an earful.
Yeah. And so,
by the way, Chester Arthur, not so horrible. I have to say,
he was an accidental president.
Whatever. All I'm saying is, of all the horror stories, that was the least offensive chapter. That's all I'm saying. Of all of each of the chapters, Chester Arthur, I made a note.
I personally think
chapter.
that Margaret is biased because Chester Arthur happens to have been from New York. So
I don't
think
that that's her bias.
Well, it's like, listen, the presidents reflect the larger society. I think that's a short and sweet way of describing all these people. But what we're talking about with Tulsa, there was never an anti-lynching bill passed for decades. There were efforts to get these bills passed. There was always an excuse of, especially with Democrats, the South was the party of the Dixiecrats.
Oh, yes.
That was, and the Democrats were the party of the segregated South. So even when Democrats were in office, like FDR, they'd always say, my hands are tied. I need Southern support. There's nothing I can do. So any effort to combat these mob attacks was never dealt with by Congress.
It's fantastic that you brought that up, because Jen and I had put out a post the other day, because as you know, the corporate media cannot stop fluffing the pillow of our current president. And, you had one person, obviously, as you know, at the New York Times, I think Nicholas Kristof was the guy who wrote the article saying that Biden's been like FDR. And we come out, we make a post basically saying, okay, here is exactly why he has not been like FDR, and he's not going to be. And then you have all of these neoliberals, a lot of them live in Manhattan, who jumped on the thing talking about, well, FDR wasn't that good a person. He had this, that, and the other thing. And I wanted to point out to them, you do understand that even though he had these super majorities in Congress, the Democratic Party had a supermajority because of the segregated South. They were all part of the party, from Virginia all the way through Louisiana, East Texas, down through Florida. And they want to pretend like this is not, they have revisionist history. They don't actually want to talk about it. I actually just finished reading the book by Doris Kearns Goodwin, Leadership in Turbulent Times. And she really talks about, what it took for LBJ to get Kennedy's legislation passed in 64 and 65, and recognizing how these factions all over the country play different roles. It's very difficult to try to break through that force field and really engaging people so that they understand what their history is all about. My question to you is, how come the powers that be have been so successful at keeping a lid on the Tulsa Massacre? The fact that it's just, it's one of the most, like I said, darkest moments in our country's history. And yet for some reason, it really doesn't seem like a lot of people actually know about it. Well,
how to keep a lid on it? I think it's part of a larger issue of American exceptionalism. So there's outright lying. You destroy the newspapers that printed the story. You make an excuse and say, we've got to use textbooks from Texas. And, well, we know what that amounts to. Yep. But there's also this desire, even by liberals. Obama used to say it all the time. It annoyed the hell out of me. He'd always talk about America is exceptional. America is indispensable. Meaning the rest of the world was dispensable. But when you have this idea that your country is the greatest, is the best, love it or leave it, that you can't question anything, then that means you have to hide a lot. You have to hide a lot of ugly history. You can't talk about the Pilgrims at Thanksgiving. You can, but you can't talk about them putting the Indian leader known as King Philip putting his head on a pike. You can't talk about that. The genocides of the original inhabitants, the way that enslavement actually worked, the segregation, all of it. When you mention FDR, the internment of Japanese Americans. And I think we always have to point out that when presidents do the right thing, it's from pressure. It's because of pressure from the people. And so, yes, you can give LBJ credit for getting this legislation through, like the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, but it's because of popular demand that forced
it. Wasn't out of the kindness of his heart, is what you're saying. It wasn't just that he just thought, God, it's just really a time for people to all be treated justly.
Seriously,
we have a good question.
I had a hard time reading that section because Doris actually worked for LBJ in 1967, and so it's one of those things where you're not gonna nail him the way that you really need to. And I think he is one of the worst presidents we've ever had. So.
All right, we're not getting off on a tangent.
No, we're not. But we do have a
request.
We have an awesome supporter of the show, Roger Meadows, and he wants you to tell us about Wilmington, North Carolina.
I'm assuming you know what he's talking about.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
1898. I'm sorry. Reconstruction did not end. We were taught that the stolen election in 1876 ended Reconstruction. That's not
made it
quite
10 times
true.
Worse.
It lived on for some time. And in Wilmington, North Carolina, it lasted almost to the end of the 1800s. There was an interracial government there. There were Republicans, of course, in Wilmington. But a mob rose up and did the same thing as in Tulsa. People were killed. They destroyed a newspaper. They chased people out of town. And a segregationist government took over. I believe it was McKinley was president at the time, and it's always presidents are asked to help, they never do anything. So it was quite horrible. It was just the same thing. I mean the end result was the same, but there was violence used to destroy those Reconstruction governments, and those few that lasted that long were often destroyed in the same way.
Oh, great.
It's obviously not a subject that we would necessarily want to dive too deep into, but obviously, the mayoral election is in a few weeks. And I'm curious as to, obviously we know what's happened, unfortunately, with Diane's campaign. Is there anybody who is running right now? We did put out a post the other day. Obviously, we do have our disagreements, obviously, with Andrew Yang, but the fact that he did endorse the New York Health Act, I think, was great. He's the one person who has. Do you have a thought as to who would be, if at all, somewhat of a transformational mayor should they win?
No, I don't think
that's pretty simple.
In this crop will be well. A couple of strange things have happened. Dianne Morales's campaign is imploding. Scott Stringer was a favorite of many progressives. Then there were allegations of sexual harassment, and that's something it's very difficult to recover from. There were some people who endorsed him, who unendorsed him. We also have the complication of ranked choice voting. Being used in the primary in a few weeks. Nobody knows what that will mean. So voters can rank up to 5 people should they choose. So nobody knows what that is going to do. So I don't know about who would be most transformational. I'm not seeing anybody in that way. Now, New York is a tough town. Most people have a liberal sensibility, but rich people run politics in New York, especially the real estate industry. And they always have a say. They make sure they have a seat at the table. So it's difficult to have the progressive legislation that most New Yorkers want. I mean, we do get it. We already have a $15 minimum wage in New York City, as an example. We got rid of there were some crooked Democrats who were always voting with Republicans in Albany. We got rid of them. They're Democratic majority in both.
How do we do that here? How do we get rid of our crooked Democrats that vote with Republicans? How do we do that?
I think you got a much better shot in New York.
I'm just asking.
Well, I think there was a concerted effort to do it. And of course, we have Cuomo as governor. So, there's only, but he also can, he's not stupid, whatever else he is. So they strengthened rent regulations that had been decimated when Pataki was governor and took so many apartments out of the reach of working people. So there are good things that have happened in this state. And that's one of the reasons that people like AOC were elected, because of this progressive momentum. So who's most possibility of being transformational? I don't know. It's and as for Biden being transformational, I'm like, oh my goodness. It's like, I mean, FDR did. I mean, we still have a Social Security Act, for example, because of that New Deal legislation. We have Medicare and Medicaid. That's transformational. But someone who says, I can't, I asked the parliamentarian about the minimum wage and they said no. And
I just wanted to have been on that meeting, and who actually thought, people will buy this. Yeah, they'll buy it.
He didn't want to do it, so they had to find a way out. I've never heard of a president asking a parliamentarian about anything. They push through what they want to push through, so he doesn't want to do it.
Clearly,
how can we get out? I know. We'll ask the parliamentarian. So someone says, "We can't do this, right?" And the parliamentarian says, "No, you can't do that." Or the student loan debt, and it really made me angry that he lied about it and said, "Well, people shouldn't pay to send somebody to the University of Pennsylvania, which costs $70,000." That's not it at all, and he knows it is, but he doesn't want to do it.
No.
The public option. What else did he go back on? I don't know. There's so many things.
$15 minimum wage.
Look, the first thing he went back on was the $2,000 check that he then turned into $1,400 check.
And then there were there was only like 20 million people who didn't actually get it because of the means testing nonsense.
Well, and then he sent this. Everybody made fun of Trump because he sent this letter with his stimulus check, and so did Biden.
Yeah,
this really is $2,000 because it's it's 2,000 minus 600, so it really is 2,000. And who first came up with the number $2,000? Trump.
Donna. I totally came up with the number. I totally came up with it. They believe me. They believe.
Oh,
they totally.
don't start.
You don't want me to do it?
I don't know. Oh God, here it goes.
I came up with the number. I totally came up with it, and they wanted to take all the credit away from me. It's totally they're terrible people, Margaret, terrible people. And I'm going to run for president again. Believe me, I'm totally getting out of that Southern District of New York nonsense. I'm gonna make a deal with them.
I think you're going to be wearing an orange jumpsuit.
It's the art of the deal.
Your orange jumpsuit will match your face.
I'll make a deal with them, or I'll bribe them, whatever it takes. Believe me when I tell you, we'll get it done. And I'm totally going to be the next president again. Look at Joe. Joe doesn't know what he's doing. He's totally lost his mind.
That is true. I will give you that.
I'm totally ready to do this again. Are you ready to support me? Are you ready to support? I'm totally ready for this. I'm going to be much better this time. Believe me when I tell you.
Viewership is dropping by the load.
Yeah, sure. That's exactly
right. Well, and who accepted 600? Nancy Pelosi. Oh, I think this is significant, she said. But at any rate, So that's what we, and these things are helping people. The additional unemployment is very helpful to people, but it's all temporary.
Yeah.
So so far there's been nothing transformational. He's proposed this huge budget. He's proposed this infrastructure. It's not clear how much of it he will actually get, because we have the only people who stand up and put their foot down and say, I'm not going to vote for this, are people on the right. And people on the left, they can't be bothered to get together a relative handful of people and say, this is what we need to see in this bill.
And I do think that a lot of people, like you said, are starting to get hip to the game. They're starting to see that the Democrats really do have control.
It's just theater. It's controlled opposition.
And the idea that they can't get Manchin and Sinema in line. No. It's like, give me a break.
If the president wanted something done,
he would get it done. And especially, and don't tell me, if this president currently has a plus 60% approval rating, do not tell me that if he used the bully pulpit that he wouldn't get what he wanted. It's nonsense.
Of course he would.
People are starting to learn on that.
Well,
but what I do think...
He said nothing will fundamentally change.
He kept
and he has kept his word.
Remember, it's okay when Biden lies, not when Trump lies.
But Joe Manchin, I feel like Joe Manchin, takes one for the team, and he says, okay, I'll be the bad guy.
Exactly.
You can all pretend that the rest of you are nice, It's just me.
Yeah.
And he's not the only Democrat who doesn't want to increase the minimum wage. Of course he's not.
Oh no,
So-
ours doesn't. Look, they're doing it now. They're doing the forced controlled opposition theater show regarding what they just did with the January 6th. To have a commissioner or an investigation into that, or now they're going to just use that to campaign on all during the season. They're going to be like, look, we wanted to investigate that.
And I do have an issue though with the idea of a commission anyway. I feel like it would be a lot of theater where the Democrats would sit around and say, we're not the ones who invaded the Capitol, look how bad the Republicans are. And it would be a way to keep us from asking them any hard questions. So I want them to help people the way we need to be helped. I want them to do what they said they were going to do, to help working people. There's so many people who are struggling, and these Republican governors who say we're going to make people go back to work by not accepting the additional unemployment. And what does Biden say? Well, there's nothing much I can do. And I said to myself, give it to them directly. I mean, cut out the middleman, send people a check. I mean, but this is another indication of people who just are not serious.
And of course, if DeSantis somehow does become our next president, it'll be like, hey, I told you so. You kind of just let it happen. And there are so many things. They have opened the door for him to not only win re-election as governor, but to basically take over the Republican Party. And I'm seeing it way in advance, and people are pretending like this ain't going to happen. I'm like, unless something significant does happen, I actually do think DeSantis is our next president, which is unfortunate, but that is where we're heading right now. But on a better note,
we're warning you people.
Yeah, on a better note, it does look like there is legitimate momentum in New York for the New York Health Act. It looks like there is something potentially happening here. I don't know how far along it may be or where it may ultimately get a vote. But one of the things that we are planning on doing is doing a Medicare for All telethon 2 days before the Medicare for All March, which is supposed to be July 24th. And we're thinking that the best thing that we could do is really hone in on a very specific thing. And I think focusing on the New York Health Act, because New York definitely has more momentum out of any of the three states between New York, Washington, and California. It definitely seems like New York is really onto something here. Senator Rivera's legislation is pretty solid from what I understand. Obviously, I have to read more into it. But the idea that we could potentially have statewide universal health care, I think there's a chance in New York. What are your thoughts on this particular piece of legislation at this point?
I think it is a possibility. You never know with Cuomo, though. He's such a problem. I think it is possible, but he's, as I said before, he's not stupid, and he has his star has fallen with the revelations about the COVID deaths in the nursing homes, which he tried to hide, with the sexual harassment allegations. So that ironically may be helpful in getting something good passed. We do have Democratic majorities in both houses, and as I said before, I do give them credit. So I think it is a good possibility. New York is a state that already has, and I'm not saying there are no problems with it. New York has the most generous Medicaid of any system of any state in the country. Of course, they as soon as there's a need to cut something from the budget, they do start there. Cuomo's closed a lot of hospitals that are that serve low-income communities. We need to get rid of him. That's the most important thing in state politics, to make sure that he doesn't even think about trying to run for a fourth term. And we get a real Democrat in office who's not a bully and a maniac.
Would you want to see Cynthia Nixon run again?
I'd say let's have somebody who has some experience in public office.
Sure.
I mean, celebrities can't usually win. There are enough people, talented people with experience in the state who I think should run for governor. I do want to mention one thing. As a Green in New York State, Cuomo, one of the terrible things he did, he hid this in a budget bill last year, basically raising the standard for being able to have a ballot line. So the Greens don't have a ballot line anymore. It used to be if you had someone that ran for your party and got at least 50,000 votes, that the party had a ballot line. But now it's been raised to such a degree that it will be almost impossible for the Green Party to do. I feel like it's important to point that out. But
well, as much as I hate to say this, they always say, well, I would veto it. If you would become the very first person to sign universal health care into law and have that legacy, I don't care how much of a crook you may be in general, you want that legacy because that would last forever. I don't care if it's Andrew Cuomo. I need people to understand that. Like, as much of a tyrant as he is, if he is going to sign universal health care into law,
that's a legacy.
You're going to have it, whether you like it or not. And that, to me, is a bargaining chip that you must take. And so having that.
And if he were to do that, people might be willing to, if not forget his other foibles. I just wish there was someone better than him, even though I'm not a Democrat.
Okay, we have Ron DeSantis, and that's an improvement for us. That's a step up for us.
Compared to Rick Scott?
So when people look at it, like, I got to tell you, seriously, when people criticize Ron DeSantis, I'm thinking, I don't even really notice anymore because he is a step in the right direction. It's pathetic. But no one's worse than Rick Scott to me.
Yeah, Rick Scott is definitely
the worst.
He may be the worst.
And he's evil. And I don't think DeSantis is evil. I just think he's just like, he's just like a mini Trump.
He's just an egotistical
he's a jerk. But I think Rick Scott is nefarious. I'm
not making any predictions about presidential elections. Will Biden still be alive to run again? Who knows?
I ain't touching that.
Kamala Harris is not going to be president. I will say that.
Look,
the only way she is going to be president is if they force her in. That's basically it.
If he has to step aside, which is what I think was the plan, because she wasn't able to win a single primary. She would not be elected. And the only way to get her in is if the 25th Amendment has to be invoked. And I do think that has been what has been being thought of a lot of the time of this whole process.
Margaret, I don't want to put too much stock into this, but I really do think that the toxicity of the K-Hive faction on social media is so detrimental.
Are you familiar with the K-Hive?
Oh, I'm sure she's very familiar.
They don't like you, do they?
They haven't attacked me yet. I'm sure we'll get along, or they'll get around to it. But I wonder how many of them are real.
I do too.
That's a fair point. That's a very fair point.
These hives of various kinds are often orchestrated. So
I think so too.
Oh, that's true too.
And that's so I don't know because how many of them are real. It's like the Bernie hating faction, being moved over to protect Kamala at any and all costs. But I don't know who's going to be the president. I mean, if Biden dies or has to step aside and she runs as an incumbent, that would help her. But I don't see her having really any grassroots support. I mean, the people who always vote for a Democrat would hold their nose, but that's not how you win a presidential election. I actually think Biden won mostly because of COVID. I agree. I think Trump could have won again if the pandemic had not occurred. He was, as the book is called, he was lucky.
Yeah.
And as you alluded to, right before COVID hit, they had calculated that Trump's reelection was about an 80% lock. So that is astronomically high even for an incumbent. But the reality is, if it were to come down to DeSantis and Kamala, I would bet my money on DeSantis all the way.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Kamala can't win an election. Yeah. I don't think she can.
But what is important, and I think we have to be, because I always say people get way too caught up in the presidential election. It's the one election you have the least amount of control over. Some of the local stuff, especially the local issues, is very important. And so Roger Meadows, he's been knocking it down, baby. We really appreciate your support.
Be a Patreon, Roger.
Roger. On June 7th, Albany, join us on June 7th in Albany to force Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins, who removed the NYHA from the Senate Health Committee agenda last day of their meeting. So that's very interesting. So maybe one of the things that we will do on the Medicare for All telethon is really center in on Andrea Stewart.
Well,
Cousins.
we'll have to wait and see
appears-
what happens, post this 7th event and see what comes of that by the time we get around.
Yeah, they're about to they're winding down the session in Albany. So we will see what comes up. Yeah.
Okay.
The one thing I am somewhat optimistic about, and Jen has mentioned as well, is I really do think that it's just a matter of time. To me, Bernie's greatest legacy is that he really did change the conversation on healthcare in the United States. And because of that, people are not going to take the nonsense anymore. They are not buying this crap that we can't have a universal healthcare system.
Yeah.
And on top of everything else, we were just discussing the other day that even though the idea, and again, we're big supporters of MMT, that it's a big difference at the macro level when you're a currency issuer versus a currency user, which obviously at the state level, you would have to tax and spend. But the truth is, if Saskatchewan can pass a universal healthcare system and then it becomes throughout all of Canada, there is no question that the state of New York could handle having a universal healthcare system. And if it were to pass in New York, it's only a matter of time before it passes in California and then the rest of the country. It only takes one, Margaret, as you know. It takes that one big domino to fall, and then it's a
Don't get violent.
I'm not going to get violent.
He's not getting violent. We have one of our, it's like our professional
it's a
troll,
troll.
Declan, but he's at this point, he's a friend of the show. He's a friendly troll. And one of the things he always says is, Peter's getting violent.
Yes.
I mean, I think you're right. There would be momentum now I know there's an issue with, is it called ERISA? There's some.
All right, don't ERISA.
And I don't know. Does that? I'm told, and I'm not sure. I'm asking.
ERISA. Can I just tell you something as a lawyer? I hate that thing. ERISA is a nightmare. And for people who don't know what it is a giant book of laws that just deal with retirement funds in this country. It is massive. It is like a tome. And there are people that specialize in ERISA. And it is its whole own thing. And it is complicated. And it is more boring than watching paint dry. That is my knowledge on ERISA.
Okay. I just wasn't sure if it... Some people say it keeps states from having their own healthcare. I don't know. I happen to believe if somebody actually did it, that it would be difficult to undo. And that's why they work so hard to silence progressives and to keep these things from happening. What was I going to say about...
so Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart Cousins is a problem. We need to deal with her.
I don't know enough about these things, so I can't comment. I can't comment on these particular points here. But I do think it, and we know it's a funny thing about Saskatchewan is, the Western Canada is more right wing, so it's one of the conservative prairie provinces actually that got it started. That's pretty interesting.
Well, that really does go to show you what we say all along, is that populism and working class people really isn't a blue or red issue.
And there really are a lot of similarities between progressives and libertarians.
Yes.
And one of the big unifying issues when it comes to universal health care, even though a lot of them see, because again, you have to emphasize that it's government funded, not government run.
Right.
And the biggest difference here is you are eliminating the for-profit middlemen who bring absolutely nothing to the table.
Right.
It is a racket. It has always been a racket, and everyone knows it's a racket. And now you're starting to see the right-wing libertarian faction of this country say, yeah, it's absolute BS. People do need healthcare, and they certainly don't need these guys taking, basically being, freeloaders. And that's what they are.
Well, the libertarians also will come at it from it's economically more beneficial to do universal healthcare, which it is. So even though it might not be a morality issue for them, they recognize that would be the least intrusive thing financially in our lives would be have universal health care.
But they're huge donors. Big Pharma, the insurance companies are huge Democratic Party donors.
Oh yeah.
And that's the issue. They the last outrageous thing I read is that they're not coding COVID. So because the government is supposed to pay for treatments for COVID, but they don't code for it. And so families are getting bills for $1 million for treatment of people, some of whom passed away, in fact, And that is because there's no regulation of these insurance companies. You know, there are countries that have national health insurance that allow private insurance, but they regulate them. They regulate what they can charge. They regulate what they can do. And,
that's Australia. That's how it is in Australia. I was watching.
Germany is well. I'm not sure, but I believe there's some European countries that also allow for private health insurance. But without any regulation, without any price controls, they do whatever they want. So people can't afford their insulin. People getting medical bills they shouldn't get. A doctor's in network, but the surgeon's in network, but the anesthesiologist isn't. So you get a big bill for anesthesia. I mean, it's horrible. It's really sickening, and it's sickening that Joe Biden. That's the one thing he did promise. No, I would veto that, and there's no one willing to take a stand
yet.
And I do, and I do believe that as difficult as it may be for some to really wrap their heads around the idea that we could afford to pay for it if we did it in a tax and spend circumstance, I think we're at the point now where it's time. And the benefits that it would have, especially to people who live in poverty, especially to communities of color, there is no question that the time is now, and it's just a matter of how we're going to break down that door. I do think that Cuomo is vulnerable enough where he might actually do it, where he would actually sign it into law.
Yes, we're at a good point. We could have a perfect storm.
Yeah, and so I think it's much more likely that you'll knock over that domino, because if you were to pass universal health care in New York, I mean, as much as it's a joke, but you would have to build that big, beautiful wall, because everyone is going to flock to New York if they haven't already, because healthcare should be a human right. No, well, that's neither here nor there. And with that said, I do think that is something that we really can be fighting for. And I think we could have a tremendous impact. I really do. And so the more we build this coalition, which is what we're trying to do, cross-pollinate as many different ways as we can, and just educating people, making them understand about the history of the Tulsa Massacre, understanding the history of how detrimental things have been for so many people for so very long. Yeah. It's time to have an awakening of sorts. And I do think people are having that.
And I want to say something. We can wrap up and bring it back to the Tulsa Massacre. The one thing that I'm very conscious of right now, and this is why I'm so passionate about the Julian Assange case, and this is one of the things I'm so passionate about, is because we are still seeing whitewashing every single day that 100 years from now will be people sitting here saying, well, I never knew about that. And so when I see things that are not being properly exposed, or books that are not being read by kids, or all of these things, is we're watching it in live time. Yeah. We're watching the same thing happen with things now. So it's so important that when things happen now, like whether it was George Floyd last summer or all of these things, that we do not allow those things to not get covered. We have to make a big deal of it. And so that's why it's important to be on these things, I think, is to keep this in our history book, so that 100 years from now, there's not somebody sitting there saying, well, I never knew about George Floyd. I don't think that.
It's the corporate media are the biggest censors in the country. It starts, sure. I believe it often starts with them. When has the New York Times or Washington Post or MSNBC, when have they said anything about Julian Assange? And when they do talk about it, it's almost always a lie. So that's why independent media is so important. Yeah. That is why what you do, what I do, is so important, so that people who are willing to get the information can find it, and that there is at least, even if it's a small group, there's someone who knows what they should be paying attention to.
Yeah. Margaret, it is a perfect place for us to wrap up. It brings our evening full circle, because the thing that we led off with on the program this evening was obviously what happened with Anna Kasparian and the statements she made towards Aaron Mate.
Did you see that nonsense?
Of course.
Okay. Well, don't say of course. I don't know that she's going to lower herself to watching nonsense with Young Turks.
I did. I lowered myself. I did.
But and again, Jen, her frenemy, Mr. Jimmy Dore here.
This is, by the way, not really himself. Jimmy Dore. I'm pretty sure that's our troll Declan.
You never know. It could very well
It's be. Not Jimmy Dore.
But I have to say, the conversation that Jimmy had with Aaron the other day was really good, and it really shined a light on the fact that the Young Turks have completely crossed over. They are no different than corporate media in terms of how they address any of these topics. And they are now they're basically just pro-war. I mean, at this point, it's just completely.
You don't get $20 million for nothing. I mean,
Bingo.
Nobody gives you that kind of money to do whatever you want to do. So, and they were, and Cenk Uygur's politics were always suspect to me anyway.
Just for sale. I just think he's for sale.
He was always a Russiagator. So I think it was more funny than anything. And their viewership has fallen so far. I think I tweeted in response to one of Aaron Mate's tweet. I said something like, I think only 10 to 15 people saw you being smeared, but being somewhat facetious. But that is why this goes back to what we were talking about. This is why they go to such pains to silence. If Aaron Mate is heard debunking Russiagate, debunking the stories of gas attacks in Syria, if he's allowed to be heard, then a lot of different things will crumble. And this tells us the importance of independent media and what we can achieve, what we must achieve.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
To that.
It's like we were talking about Memorial Day and I said, I really want to cover the Tulsa Massacre. I really love if Margaret could come on and talk about it. And he goes, all right, I'll just ask her. And the fact that I'm like, it was like the best. It's like ask and you shall receive.
Well, it was a good moment. I had nothing else on my calendar for tonight, so I was happy to do it.
No, thank you so much.
You are definitely an official friend of the show.
Oh, yeah.
There's no question about it. You are more than welcome.
You could run for governor, Margaret.
No, thank you.
Margaret actually wants to keep her sanity and live a long, healthy life.
Well, no, and the truth is that's not where everybody is most effective. People are most effective in the way.
And that is one of the things that we've talked about, especially with Nina Turner, is that there has to be this inside-outside strategy. You cannot just focus on electoral politics. You have to be able to have this grassroots effort on the outside, because otherwise you are, as FDR did say, make me do it. It's the only way it's going to happen. And that's why I do think we are building momentum now. And so having you on definitely puts smiles on our faces. Yes, it's always a great time. And thank you so much for sharing the info on the Tulsa Massacre. It's very important.
Thank you so much, Margaret.
And we'll see you soon.
You're very welcome. Thanks so much. Good night.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Have a great evening, love.
Okay, you got it?
Yes. Yeah. And so with that said,
I love her.
How could you not? She's she pulls no punches.
I kind of have my own personal historian. Like, I need to know about this.
Okay, this is definitely Declan. There is no way that this is
not
Declan.
First of all, and my name is Jen, not Jan. And if you're going to...
Sure, Jan.
Yeah, Jan. All right, so let's get into news. We could talk a little news.
It's our final subject of the night, guys.
We'll get over our focus on Florida.
And again, we do talk about DeSantis because he has to be talked about because people want to act like there's honestly, I just have to say the fact that Anna Eskamani is not running for governor.
It's sad.
Really, I kind of think that she was possibly the one wild card that could have knocked off DeSantis.
But you need to not digress on that.
No, but DeSantis is definitely doing everything in his capacity to do whatever is necessary to not only win re-election as governor, but to set basically lay the foundation for winning the presidency. And I think right now he's on his way. I really do.
Well, so this is what's going on. Well, he's done more than two things, but these two things,
it's just
back to back, right?
So the first thing that he's doing,
you see what I did there?
Yes, game face. And
that is such a game face.
So we're going to talk about the good thing that he is doing,
yes.
And it is a good thing. Thank you, Democrats, for allowing Ron DeSantis to have a lane.
Seriously,
really
that's how pathetic our state is. With how pathetic our democratic infrastructure is. So the fact that he's actually pushing for Floridians to receive cheaper prescription drugs from Canada. Now, my understanding is that Biden is supporting this. And so,
sure.
But this kind of action is somebody who's running for office.
100%.
That's what that is. And then you combine that, and now what these things are, granted, are a little bit authoritarian, but so we kind of like it when it serves us. And also saying that he will fine cruise lines in violation of the law if they're requiring passengers to be vaccinated. So, this is obviously going to be very contentious.
So he's basically doing two things with these two pieces of legislation. Yeah. What he's doing with the lowering of the prescription drug prices is he is catering 100% to the independent voter who may or may not be thinking, well, DeSantis is just a little too MAGA for my taste. But if he's willing to do this, I am going to vote for him because I don't trust the Democrats.
Right.
That is you got to give him credit for that.
And most voters are people that are not affiliated. Most voters are independent voters.
100%. And then you swing it over to this ridiculous need to say, I'm not going to make you wear a mask. This is red meat for the MAGA base. They love stuff like this, and it just gets them riled up. And you say, well, they're going to vote for DeSantis anyway, so why would he feel the need to do this? Why? Because a riled up base is a base that goes and knocks on doors, phone banks, text banks, does everything in their capacity to make sure that their candidate wins.
I also want to say that doesn't just appeal to MAGA people. That appeals to libertarians. And something that kind of, to be honest, it appeals to me. So like when I look at something like that, that's the kind of thing I like. And I'm not a MAGA person. So
John is right. John Doherty, friend of the show. Listen, I have said it so many times and people want to pretend like I don't know what I'm talking about.
Nobody pretends that.
DeSantis is loved by his base. Loved.
Yep.
And that is not true for a lot of representatives around the country. He is considered a trailblazer by the populist right.
And the truth is he's not hated.
No.
And again, had Scott.
I have a lot of issues. I got a lot of issues with him, but he is not Rick Scott.
He's not hated.
Rick Scott to me is a mass murderer.
Oh.
He's
a criminal and should be incarcerated. So, DeSantis is not hated. Yes, the Democrats want to get him out because they like blue no matter who, and they want to push him out and they're going to hate him for whatever reason they hate him.
So,
but he's not, he doesn't get a visceral response.
So let's say Nikki Fried is the nominee. Nikki, you have pissed off John Morgan of all people because of your wishy-washiness on an issue like cannabis. What do you think is going to happen?
Although it's not like John Morgan has the high ground to take. So I don't know what that.
But
that
John Morgan is. But John Morgan is definitely the type of person who, if you are trying to run for office, he's not a strings attached type of big donor. He is somebody who supports civil liberties and a variety of issues that most people do support. But if you are wishy-washy on those issues, he will call you out.
So who is a potential challenger?
I don't think there is anybody else.
I don't either.
I think that this is one of those circumstances where if Val Demings were to have run for governor, I do think that she could potentially have pulled it off. But
that's not what's happening.
No, she's deciding to run for senator. And now she's getting in the way of who was the best statewide candidate running,
against Marco Rubio is Alan Ellison.
And he's good.
Alan Ellison is good.
If you haven't seen our podcast with him, highly recommend you check it out.
We'll have him on again at some point.
Absolutely, we will.
Yeah, and so Val Demings getting into the senatorial race against Rubio really is like a negative because we have a good, strong progressive in that category. What we need is somebody good to run against DeSantis.
You don't need the best candidate to be the Senate candidate. In this state, it always leads with the gubernatorial race.
Yeah.
Always. You are putting the best candidate you have. And again, a lot of issues with Val Demings, but she's certainly better than Stephanie Murphy or some of the worst possible options. Charlie Crist, for goodness sake.
Okay, so that's another thing. I don't even want to talk about that.
There's a lot of people who actually think that because Nikki Fried is somewhat of a weak candidate, even though she's a statewide elected representative, that there's a real chance that Charlie Crist might become the nominee.
Great, let him be the nominee, and then he'll just lose to DeSantis.
Oh my God.
So
here's one thing I will guarantee, and I'll bet money on it. If Charlie Crist is the nominee, DeSantis will walk. He won't even be challenged. It'll be a 5.
It'll be ugly.
It'll be a 5-point margin.
It'll be a slaughter.
It'll be bad.
All right. When can we move on about DeSantis?
We are done with DeSantis. We are now moving on. We're going to end on a happy note.
Are you going to end with my happy news? Did you see how I did? But
we are going to address what is just the classic Florida.
This is a Florida story. Thing. Well, the filthiness, the complete
filthiness, and of course, where else did it freaking happen but in Miami?
Oh yes. So a little town in Miami. There's a municipality within Miami called Medley. And this woman is a councilwoman in Medley. So even though it sounds like it's a small podunk, it's actually in Miami. Okay, so people understand that. This woman, see how I did that here? So I kind of combined it because she's a reptile. Florida bites and is full of reptiles, like this lady.
See, Santana Moss is a former NFL star.
And
He
that
was
gentleman is not the reptile to which I'm referring. I'm referring to the woman right there. Okay.
No, Santana Moss was a really solid wide receiver in the NFL for
It
a
all
long
comes
time.
down to sports for
Well,
you.
sports is everything. And that to me is a very important issue here because he has obviously done a lot of great work off the field. You know, not everybody does. But he happens to be one of them.
Big
and, we've done
foundation. He has a big charity foundation.
Yeah, we do have a big charity foundation. And the lady's name, forgive me for, I got to freaking look this up now.
This lady right here.
Yes. I got to get her name. She's not an elected official, or at least she's not anymore.
No, she was, though.
Yeah.
She was a council person. She was the council person, and she was using her connection to his charity and the gifts from his charity. And she was giving those gifts to get votes. She was using the gifts from his charity that she had access to.
Is Lily Stefano, and she would be kind of like a bootlicker.
Well, here's the thing.
But
She's really more Florida Bites and is full of reptiles category kind of person because it's very reptilian what she did and very Florida reptilian, which is why I kind of just combined that today with Focus on Florida because we were having two guests.
The worst part, the worst part about this story, as I read in the Miami Herald, is the fact that she just has like this, it's not that big of a deal. I totally wasn't trying to do what you think I was trying to do. No, you were trying to do that. It's pretty freaking obvious what you were doing.
She was using gifts from a private charity foundation and giving them to voters to vote for her. Yeah, that's pretty bad.
If we can't listen, I don't think Trump is going to go down the way that people think he's going to go down, but I really think there is substantial evidence to take down Matt Gaetz. And if he does not go down,
why are we over at Matt Gaetz?
The reason we're over at him is because it's just another example of how so many of people in politics never pay the price. They never pay the price.
Certainly not the people, usually not the people that are like Matt Gaetz, that are from wealthy, privileged political families, almost like a dynasty. Those people never really seem to pay for anything. Women like this, I don't know, because someone might be willing to throw her under a bus. I'm not sure.
I'm going to answer this question for John really quick. In an era of American baseball, to start with, that I would recommend that you check out. That's a very good question. I would definitely say, and the great thing about baseball is that there's always parity. When the Yankees were winning in the mid
by parity, parity,
yes.
Not parody.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Just checking. It's not like a who's on first thing.
Who is on first?
Parody.
Well, there you go. And I would definitely say that in terms of era of baseball, that was highly, highly competitive. You could definitely look to the 80s and even the early 90s. And then, of course, I would definitely say the 2000s in particular. There's a lot
1955 Brooklyn Dodgers.
The 1955 Brooklyn Dodgers are definitely one of the most important teams in baseball history because them bums became next year.
It was Jackie Robinson.
That is correct. And, well, it's not just
Sandy.
The 55 Brooklyn Dodgers had a who's who. They had Don Zimmer. They had Sandy Koufax. They had Duke Snider. They had Jackie Robinson. They had Pee Wee Reese. Pee Wee Reese, one of the most unheralded heroes in American history, because he is the person that really allowed Jackie Robinson to be accepted. He did something in, I think it was Cincinnati.
Do you see how all you have to do is ask this man a sports question, and now we're off on a tangent? Can we get to the happy news?
Well, he put his arm around Jackie in full view of everybody, and
Lou came up.
That's when it became, well, white power's here, but
white power. She's white power. But the thing, nobody is about white power like Lou. White power. She's just the whitest dog I've ever seen. But
the good news is
she comes up when she knows we're wrapping up.
Yes, and we have a happy story that we can.
This pleases me. I try to put little animal stories on them. Have you noticed I try to add that, like when we did Panthers last
John,
week?
you will if you want to read a great history story, read up on the 1955 Brooklyn Dodgers.
And who's the one who said that? Thank you.
She'll have a lot of fun with that.
Do you see that? It's like rubbing off on me. Actually, I knew about that from somebody else. So turtles, very exciting news.
Yes.
A rare endangered sea turtle was found on a Central Florida beach laying eggs, which is very exciting.
Very important.
And I'm going to look up the name. I remember thinking it wasn't a name that meant anything. It was like rare green sea turtle or something. Like it wasn't something that I could say, and it's this special kind of turtle.
One of the things that we do worry about so much when it comes to obviously climate change here in Florida is
we're killing our critters.
Oh,
we're killing our critters. So when I see something that we're seeing new growth, new species, and yet it's still somewhat dampened by the fact that I know that they're living in plastic polluted water, and that if you were to do a biopsy of them, you would probably find plastic. So, I mean, it's not great, but I do love the idea that we're still having natural wildlife in Florida. It's nice to see. And the fact that there is an unusually or uncommonly seen species of sea turtle pleases me.
Yeah.
And so that's good. And we do, you know what? For the most part, Florida takes its sea turtles fairly seriously.
Yeah.
For the most part, our coasts, our beaches, and our municipalities do the best that they can to protect our sea turtles. There's restrictions on lighting. There's restrictions on the beaches.
And I also think you've got a lot of people that really care, and that's important. I think that
I really care.
You know, there's
save the sea turtles, man.
I think a lot of people in the state really do care about the environment. It's just that big agribusiness and all that in between. It dominates our state legislature. And again, everyone points the finger at Republicans. You can point their finger at Republican legislators. I guarantee you that you've made friends with a lot of Republicans.
I don't have a problem with that.
But again, we have the same issue here. We feel like we're going to elect somebody that's going to work on our behalf. I guarantee you Republican voters have the same problem. They think that what they're electing is somebody who's actually fighting for them. And as it turns out, no, they're fighting for their corporate interests. That's what they're fighting for. So there are a lot of ways that we can bring these coalitions together, and we do have to cross-pollinate. Very, very important.
It's a Kemp's Ridley sea turtle. Kemp with a K. Kemp 'S Ridley sea turtle.
And they are nesting and growing.
Also called the Atlantic Ridley sea turtle, are the rarest species of sea turtle and is the world's most endangered species of sea turtles. And we just have evidence of one laying eggs on our beach, so that pleases me.
Thursday night, guys.
Who do we have Thursday night?
As we like to say on the show many, many a times, the future of our movement is a non-corporate, non-partisan labor movement. And one of the most important figures in the labor movement right now is none other than Chris Smalls.
Oh, yes, that's right. Chris Smalls is coming on.
So Chris Smalls will be back.
For people who don't know, Chris Smalls is an Amazon employee who stood up against Amazon in Staten Island at their distribution center up there when COVID was first, starting to be tested for and stuff, and really spoke out against the conditions of the facility and what they were doing to address COVID. And he ended up getting fired, which is what happens to whistleblowers. And now I think he's back full force. And I heard something about them trying to unionize Staten Island.
That is what he's doing. He's and you know what? Let New York lead the way.
Oh, yeah.
Because I would, no disrespect to California, but New York has always been the state that leads the way.
And the truth is, I'll take it wherever I can get it.
100%.
So Chris Smalls will be back on. We're going to talk about the future of unionizing the Staten Island Distribution Center.
We may even have a candidate who's running for office as a guest as well.
He's into this having multiple guests thing. So now
I think having multiple guests is fun.
It's fun. It's pressure. It's pressure to get guests.
No. Not for me.
Not for you, but for, people like John.
No way.
All right. I'm just saying.
But we love you guys. We appreciate you. Thank you for
also, anybody local, tomorrow, Trash and Taco Tuesday, we will be out at Hollywood Beach. We will be at the, it's the
Connecticut.
Yes, it's Connecticut and Garfield, but it's Charnow Park Pavilions on the beach, which are at the Garfield/Connecticut Street Pavilions on Hollywood Beach. We will be there at 6
p.m. And why 6?
Because it's hot.
It's hot, and it's also more convenient for people who work. So let's hopefully have a nice turnout.
So we're going to have 6 o'clock tomorrow. Meet us at the beach. We're going to do a cleanup. We're going to have our tacos. And I think I might have a solution for the individually wrapped tacos, which includes me individually wrapping the tacos.
That's nice.
So, because that's the biggest pain.
We'll see you soon, guys.
Bye, all. Peace out.